Hello and welcome to Episode 6 of our Unit4 Financials feature Spotlight series. In this episode, we're going to cover invoice matching issues. What are the main issues when it comes to invoice matching? First, the VAT does not balance. I'm always surprised when I go to clients and find they're putting VAT on the purchase order. So I'm going to show you how you can set up Unit4 Financials, previously known as Coda, so that you do not put VAT on the purchase order and VAT does not become an issue in matching, because all you're matching is the net. The other thing that normally happens is that you get freight charges on an invoice, but it is not on the purchase order because the buyer at the time does not know what the freight charges are, so they leave it off. And then the vendor supplies invoices with freight, and obviously then the invoice does not balance to the GRN. The other problem, which is very common, is when the invoice comes in, the goods or services have not been received. And the final one is where you're being overcharged by the supplier. So I'm going to go into Unit4 Financials. First, I'm going to demonstrate how Unit4 Financials can work without VAT being matched. I'm going to create a purchase order. I've kept it very simple, as you can see. I'm going to add the supplier. For example, KPMG. The department is finance. For the item code, let us say it's going to be audit fees. Unit price is £1,000, and additional information we will say audit fee, validate. You can see I've not put anything to do with VAT. It is literally a price, net value. Submit for approval. What I have set this up as is auto approval, but normally it would go through a workflow. So it has created a purchase order. PO021. I will now go and receipt it. Receipting is no different than you would normally receipt. You credit the GRN, either part receive or receive everything. In this instance, I'm going to receive the whole amount. Now, the next part is different because what I'm going to do is match it on the net. Our order number is PO021. I'm going to call up the LRN. You can see it is calling up KPMG. It has the finance department, so it is filling in everything it needs to. Supplier invoice number, invoice date, and the invoice total was £1,000. VAT is £200. Now watch what happens on the next page. We go into the matching screen and all it is going to do is match the net amount. It is not interested in the VAT. In the UK, whatever the supplier adds on as much as VAT is concerned, that is what you accept, even if they've got it wrong. If the vendor supplier puts in £199, I will put it down as £199. I'm not going to match the VAT. I'm only interested in the net amount, the £1,000. So, if I commit that, I will now post to Unit4 Financials and it would post the VAT as £200. Let us have a look at freight charges now. I'm not going to post that there and I'll save some time and just use the same invoice. Let us go back to the input screen and say that there were some freight charges. For example, the freight is £10. The VAT will be £202. What you can do here is add a Sundry Line, and dependent on whether you've set up the Sundry Line master, and in this case we have for freight, it is now going to populate the correct GL code account string. I will add the purchase order, and all this is configurable in this line. It is a non-matchable line. Add in the freight amount. Now go into matching, and you can see the invoice is £1,010. The LRN/GRN is 1,000, but now we've got a Sundry Line of 10, and that will go to the freight account. There are other ways you can do it. You could have gone into the screen and go into the actions, and you'll notice that you can add a Sundry Line at this point. There are various ways of doing it. I've just taken the easy one, that in the previous screen, you've got the physical invoice in front of you. It has got a freight charge, and you can add the Sundry Line in before you try and match it. As I said, there is nothing wrong with actually going into the matching screen, finding the £10 discrepancy, and then adding the Sundry Line to the document. It is your choice how you do this. My preference is to do it before you get to the matching screen, then it should match totally and you just commit. That's how we handle sundry charges. And if, for example, the summary charges of your invoice are coming in via an interface, then your interface should be able to assign a sundry line as it is coming through the interface. And if it is not, then it can be altered. Even if it's web services or XML, no matter how the header information is being fed into Unit4 Financials, you can get your interface to add sundry lines at that point and save the mismatching. As it is coming in by an interface, you can set up background matching to do all the matching without any AP involvement. With background matching, the interface will feed all the header information in. It'll go into a background matching schedule task. When you set that schedule is totally up to you, whether it is at the end of the day, first thing in the morning. And what Unit4 Financials will attempt to do in the background matching is assign all the LRNs to the invoices. And if they match, we'll post to Financials. If they do not match, you'll find them in Invoice Maintenance. So if you've got the ability to run background matching, then all the AP department needs to do is tackle those invoices that don't match. Now, one thing I need to make clear on background matching is that background matching will only work on tolerances to do with write-offs, and I'm going to go into this subject in a minute. There are 3 ways that an invoice can be different, 3 ways that financials can account for those differences. One is what we called write-off, the other is what we call a request for credit, and the final one is a debit note. So, background matching. When you set the tolerances up in background matching, Financials is obviously not clever enough to decide, is this a request for credit, or is this a debit note, or is this a write-off? So you have to set tolerances up just for write-off. So if you are happy for background matching to write off €1, £1 or 10%, whichever is the smallest, then that is the way to do it. Background matching will use tolerances, and the best way to set up background matching is with unique user tolerance master and matching master. That makes sure that the control is firmly in place so that you do not start matching or exceed tolerances that you do not want to. Let us go back and change this again. What I'm going to do is remove that freight charge and going to change this invoice totally. Say the supplier overcharges you by £50. That should become 200. If I now try and match, you'll find it is ignoring the VAT as normal and it is trying to match an invoice for £1,050 against an LRN of £1,000. As I say, if this is background matching and the £50 is within tolerance, it will allow you to write it off. What are the options here? If you go into line balancing and you'll see the discrepancy types, write-off, debit note, or request for credit. If I suggest write-off, value, and I adjust this to 1050 and apply, what that's going to do, as you can see, it now matches. If I press the commit and post to Financials, it'll post an extra line. It'll post 1050 to creditors, it'll post a £1,000 to the expense line, and it will also create another expense line going to the same expense, but that will be identified as a write-off. It gives you the ability through reporting to see which suppliers are overcharging, if that is what the £50 is. But obviously, what you can do is set up reason codes. It does not have to be this value or price or quantity. You can set up whatever reason codes you want. And the reason code could be overcharge. You decide what those reasons are for overcharging. So that's how write-off works. Now, the same thing applies if it was a debit note. The only difference with a debit note is that it will create 2 documents when you post to Financials. The first document will be the actual invoice, and the invoice will be for £1,050. But then it creates a second document called a debit note. On the debit note, it'll be for £50. When you do a payment run, you'll only pay the supplier £1,000 because the debit note will be offset against it. What's the difference between a debit note and a request for credit? It depends on the relationship with the supplier. A debit note means that you are making the decision. You are saying, I've been overcharged. I'm going to issue a debit note to the supplier and I'm going to reduce the payment from £1,050 to £1,000. You are taking control. You're not asking the supplier permission to reduce the amount. you are issuing a debit note and saying, this is it, you're overcharging me, I'm paying you £1,000. The request for credit is, as the name implies, you're going to request a credit note off the supplier. You're not going to be able to match it until you get that credit note from the supplier. I'm now going to show you the process of raising a credit note, because I know in the UK, credit notes are a lot more prevalent than debit notes. What I have noticed from traveling is that debit notes are very popular in the US, but requests for credits are more popular in the UK. If I do a request for credit, again, I'll make it 1,050. Reason code, say value, and apply the changes. You can see now that it is matched, fully assigned, and fully balanced. And in the RFC, the request for credit is saying £50. Now, when I try and post it or commit, it is not going to post to financials. You cannot post a balanced document that has requests for credit. What it's going to do, and dependent on the amount, it is going to go into WIP. If it is outside the tolerance, it will go into a workflow, a discrepancy workflow. So it'll go for authorization, either to the buyer or management, for them to approve the request for credit. What I have done in this instance is my tolerance is £100, so it's not going to go into a workflow. But what I could do is configure financials so that when it goes into a work in progress, I can issue a request to credit to the supplier. So the supplier will receive a document saying, we request a credit note against this purchase order for this amount for these reasons. So that is what a request for credit is. It is not actually a credit note, it's a request. Until you get the credit note, it is going to remain a work in progress. I'm going to take this, and it's a work in progress. The next part is you wait for the credit note to appear. Once the credit note comes in, you create the credit note. Audit number P0021. You can see it's picking up the supplier, a supplier credit note number. The associated invoice number is today's date, and the credit note date, say, came in today. Now notice that if I put the credit note date, it calculates the due date based on the vendor-supplier terms, but you can change it. In other words, you can change it so that the credit note can be applied at the same time as the original invoice, but I'm just going to leave it for this purpose. Document description, overcharge, and the credit note total. So the credit note is for £60 and the VAT is for £10. Now all I'm going to do is save it. I'm not going to try and match it because I've not got anything to match against at the moment. All I'm going to do is save the credit note. Now I'm going into WIP matching. Remember, it is work in progress. The supplier is KPMG, and there is the invoice in work in progress. I'm going to open it up to match. And you can see here that it is showing completely assigned and balanced. But if you try and commit, it will just go back into work in progress. You cannot apply or commit an invoice that has got a request for credit unless it is matched against the credit note. You will notice here that the invoice, that green tick, means that it has been a match or balanced. What I must do first is add the credit note. There is an icon here. I know it says add invoice, but it means a credit note invoice, whatever you want. I'm going to add the invoice. I'm going to search for the credit notes, and you can see here, there's the credit notes, the first one. I'm going to add that to the document. You can see now that the credit note has not got a tick against it. It has not been assigned. But in the LRN, I've got my requests for credits. So those two need to be matched up, the credit note against the requests for credit. The simplest way for me is to run auto-assignment. If I run auto-assignment, the credit note has been matched. If I look in LRNs, it is not there because it is now in line balancing. There's the £50 there. What I can do now is commit, and it will post both the credit note and the invoice to financials. If I go into finance, call up a report, and the PO number is PO021. You can see there is the credit note for £60, and here are the 3 lines relating to the invoice. The invoice is for £1,260. It'll be offset against the £60 overcharge, so you're only going to pay them £1,200. £1,000 is going to the expense and £50 is going to VAT. The accounting is exactly how you wanted to post. And that was a brief demonstration on how to deal with issues facing your invoice matching. We hope you found it useful. You can watch more of our Unit 4 Financials Spotlight series on our YouTube channel. Here at Millennium Consulting, we provide dedicated support for your business. Our team of consultant-grade application and technical experts provide you with a wealth of experience in supporting mission-critical systems. We monitor and manage your solutions so you do not have to, allowing you to focus on growing your business. Contact us for further details by visiting our website, millenniumconsulting.com. Thank you.